In recent years, the legislature has considered multiple bills on the topic of abortion, some making it more difficult to obtain, others that would expand access. To help us understand how you would approach these issues, here are two bills that have been presented in the recent past. The first, would you support a Maine law that imposes new regulatory standards on clinics that provide abortion, forcing some of them to shut down? And the second, would you sign a bill that allows physician assistants in medically underserved areas to perform abortions without a doctor present? Either, both, why or why not?
Terry, that question goes to you first. It was multi-part.
I think I got it.
Okay.
Okay. The first part of the question, Greg, was about would I support new clinic standards. I haven't read the ones that you're speaking of in terms of the specific proposal, but I'd have to be persuaded in a significant way that the standards that we have now are somehow inadequate, and I'm not aware that they are.
Where would you, who would you talk to? Where would you get that information? What would you ask?
Well, the first thing I would do is go back to the legislation that was proposed and look at who testified and learn from there who I would seek out at that point. I mean, this is a specific proposal that was before the legislature last year. It's not part of the Treasury business, so I wasn't paying attention. I just need you to know that. So I would be looking at the legislative record in particular, and then from there branch out to see who had already shown up, because they had a passion on the issue. The second part had to do with whether or not physicians' assistants could perform an abortion without a physician being present. I do not have the expertise to answer that question at the moment. I don't know what skills are required, so I have to tell you, I honestly don't know, Greg. I need more information than I have today.
Thank you. Alan?
I'm always confused by conservatives who argue that government ought to get out of business and regulation and get off their backs. And yet when it comes to this issue, they want government right in the middle of that decision. And that's wrong. This is a decision to be made by an individual woman and her family or her medical caregivers. That's all. And I will not support at any time any bill that restricts that woman's right to make her own choice. And isn't it interesting that if a man was giving birth, we wouldn't even have this conversation?
Alan, what about the bill that would expand the ability to the physician assistants and other nurse practitioners to perform abortions without a doctor?
Honestly, I don't know enough to understand whether that works or not. So
and how would you go about answering that? If it was on your desk, what would the process be?
Does it interfere with a woman's right to choose? If it does, I don't support it.
Okay, Shawn, the question goes to you.
Again, and I apologize because these are, I'm sorry, Greg, but I think I understand enough about the second question so that I would say no. I think if a physician's involved, to me, you know, to go down that pathway of expanding that, opening up to other people that may not be qualified or whatever the situation may be, I think if I understood the question correctly, I would not support that. The other thing I would not support is the taxpayers' dollars going towards abortion. But I do need a reference on the first.
And the first one is would you support stricter regulations, regulatory standards on clinics that are presently performing abortion that would result in some of them being closed?
I honestly would have to look at that bill to see the details, look at the summary section and read that through.
And again, who would you talk to? What would you ask?
I think go to the legislative leaders and get their detail, whoever proposed the bill. And then you always want to go to the other side, too. You want to make sure you understand both sides of the issue, the details of the law itself. I haven't seen it, so I'm not sure. And I wouldn't want to answer it without seeing it and looking at it in detail.
All right, thanks.
Thank you. And Janet.
We know why those so-called standards for clinics are being proposed in states across the country. They are clearly intended solely to limit the right of access to safe and legal abortion. I would oppose them. And I helped draft the second measure to deal with the scope of practice for any healthcare procedure, including abortion. It should be up to the licensing boards and the regulatory authorities dealing with physician's assistants, family nurse practitioners, and physicians to determine whether or not they are capable of performing early-term abortions by pharmaceutical means. That's what it's about. And it is about providing access in the rural areas predominantly. Instead of having someone to drive, asking someone to drive 50 or 80 miles to see a doctor, when this can be done much more simply, more accessibly, and safely through non-physician medical experts.
Thank you. Okay.